Hi guys, hope you're doing well. I know I'm wearing something that is different to what I was wearing in the thumbnail, but I had too much cheese today and it's also Halloween, so I feel like a t-shirt is more appropriate than a shirt. So anyways, welcome to another episode wrap up. In this video, I'm just gonna be going through all the books that I've read in the month of October. Actually, for some of the books, I started reading at the end of September, but I just wanted to include them all into this video because I finished them in September as well. So the first book that I read was The Midnight Library by Haig, and I first gave it 4 stars, but then I decided to bump it down to 3 stars. Just this situation, the reason why I gave it 4 stars at first was because at the beginning of September I had a depression relapse, and it was the worst relapse I've ever had, and I was actually sent to a psychiatric hospital and I stayed there for a couple of weeks before I was allowed to, well, go home. This was the first book that I read after my relapse, and at that time, you know, I was just like a vulnerable person, like in general, and this book kind of was the comfort read that I needed at that time, and it does carry a heartwarming message, and on that basis I gave this book 4 stars. But then, well, actually, so what this book is about, so basically in this book we begin with the protagonist called Nora. She is a depressed woman in her 30s, and she feels like she has failed all aspects of her life to the point where one day she decides to take her own life. But instead of dying, she ends up in a place called the Midnight Library, which takes place between life and death, and where every book tells a story which is a life that she could have lived if she had made different decisions. So this kind of becomes a chance for her to undo her regrets and see if she would have been happier in other lives. And you follow her through different journeys, and the whole point of her just, you know, testing different lives out is to see what would have been truly fulfilling in her life and what makes life worth living. That's pretty much it. And at first I quite liked this book, but then I gave this book another read. I think the biggest problem with this book is that it has very little that can be open to interpretation, because the author is very deliberate with how you should think and feel, because he literally just spelled it out for you. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with the message he is trying to convey. Actually, I think it's quite heartwarming message and I quite like it, but some part of the book feels very unnatural and actually a little bit forced. Like the librarian of the library sometimes just, you know, gives you those cheesy one-liners, things like the only way to learn is to live, or the game is not over until it's over. I mean, Nora, she is a woman in her 30s and she just committed suicide, and 30 is the age where you start to become hardened by life. And if I committed suicide at the age of 30, if I was Nora and librarian told me those cheesy one-liners, I'd be like, just let me die. Like, that's the point, that's the reason why I committed suicide in the first place, isn't it? So that's kind of the problem I had with this book. And also the main character Nora, she is clearly written by a man, because she's so one-dimensional. Like, she's just a typical cardboard cutout of a character, I would say. But yeah, but I'm not sure if this book is, you know, deep enough to provide people who are not depressed some insight into depression. I mean, I certainly was able to get something out of this book, like, you know, don't ruminate about my past, live in the present and live my life and be happy and all that stuff. I mean, it just feels like it feels like a self-help book written in the form of fiction, but I think it's quite nice, a comfort read. So on that basis I decided to give this book 3 stars. Not 4 stars because it's not that perfect. So that's The Midnight Library. And then I read Dance 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 by Haruki Murakami, and you may have already noticed it's the name of my channel, and indeed I named my channel after this book. But at the time I hadn't read this book and I didn't know if I liked this book, but now that I've read it, I actually quite like this book. I gave it 3 stars and a half. It's very close to a 4 star, but for some reason that I'll get to later, I didn't give it 4 stars. This book is apparently the 4th book of the Rat series, which I think it works as a standalone story as well, because I haven't read any of the other books in that series. And I think this book is quite complicated in terms of characters and plots, and it's very fast-paced, very dynamic, and a little dreamy, and some of the characters are quite dreamy as well, like a one-armed poet and a psychic 13-year-old dropout, which is really cool to read those characters. Basically, the story begins with an unnamed protagonist. He is a divorced man in his mid-30s and he is a freelance journalist. He mostly writes restaurant reviews, and it is a job he describes as shoveling snow, you know, cultural snow. That's what he said. So the book begins with the narrator talking about the Dolphin Hotel and how often he dreams of it after a previous lover of his called Kiki, who took him there, disappeared. And in his dream, seems that Kiki, his ex, is crying and calling him out. So he decides to take a break from his work and sets about flying to Sapporo to find out what's happening. Well, so Sapporo is where the Dolphin Hotel locates, and it's very far away from Tokyo, so he has to fly there. And the Dolphin Hotel, according to our narrator, is a biological dead end and a place caked with unfulfilled dreams. So it's a very pathetic place. But upon arrival, he sees the Dolphin Hotel and it is being renovated, and it's now called Dolphin Hotel but written in French. It's all fancified, and the narrator likes the grit and grime. It's the newness that he fears. So he decides to find out why, like what's going on, what has led to the renovation of the hotel, and who has done it and why. Because with the new hotel, he just feels like he's unable to connect with his past, and he can't find out like what's going on in his dream, like why has Kiki disappeared, why is she crying, and all that stuff. So he just decides to stay there, and at the hotel he befriends the hotel receptionist and also a 12-year-old girl or 13-year-old girl there. He meets his high school classmate, people die, the main character travels between universes, and just lots of things happened. And I can't really tell you what exactly happened without spoiling the book, so I just stopped there. I quite like this book and I devoured it within a day. And overall, it's a book of uncertainties and paradoxes, and it kept me wondering after finishing the book and kind of left me a bit unsatisfied, like what was that all about? Which is also a recurring line in the book, because lots of things were not, clearly explained to you by the end of the book. But I feel like if Murakami were to spell everything out, it would have spoiled the book. And I think that's the beauty of this book, is just to keep you wondering. And the reason why I didn't give this book 4 stars is because of Murakami's portrayal of women, especially the way he sexualizes women, these female characters. Like, for example, in one chapter, the main character was looking at the receptionist that he is trying to befriend, and he says to himself, I like seeing her there. As I thought to myself, I could have slept with her if I wanted to. I was like, what? Like, I was just a bit disgusted by what he said. And also, I couldn't find where it was, but, in one chapter, narrator said that he was a bit attracted to a 12-year-old girl. Like, I was like, that's a bit inappropriate. And I actually read another interview, which features Murakami and another Japanese female novelist called Kawaguchi. They were talking about Murakami's book, Killing Camaraderie. I'll just read you the interview verbatim. Kawakami says, in other words, the conversation provides us with more information on the personality and demeanor of the narrator, who would otherwise remain something of a mystery to the readers. And Murakami says, that's right, he is the sort of person who a 12-year-old girl would feel comfortable talking to about her breasts. He has that kind of personality. I'm like, who is the woman 12-year-old boys would feel comfortable talking to about their penises? Like, what? I don't like sex in Murakami's book in general, but apart from the sex, apart from the way he sexualizes his female characters, I think this book is still very good overall. So that's that stance. And then I read Klara And The Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I also got the book in Japanese. The cover is so cute and I have to have it. So Klara And The Sun, I gave this book 4 stars. The story begins with Klara. She's an artificial friend. She's at the store hoping to be chosen by a family. And artificial friends, or AFs, they are just, human-like androids who are commonly used for children who just need a friend at home. Like, I could have needed one. So Klara is an AF at the store being sold with a bunch of other AFs, and she is known for her observational skills. And she always hangs out at the front window display where she gets to observe people on the street, and she's able to notice specific things about them that a person normally wouldn't at the surface level. So one day a girl called Josie visits the store, and as soon as she sees Josie, the both of them kind of just feels this special connection between them, and Josie decides to purchase Klara. Well, Josie's mom purchases Klara and they bring Klara home. And Josie is actually very, very weak, and she has a sickness that wasn't explained in the book. But Klara thinks that it's her responsibility to make Josie happy, to look after Josie, and she even thinks that it's her responsibility to restore her health. So throughout her time looking after Josie, Klara as an android is trying to answer the fundamental question, what does it mean to love? I just want to say, although this book is labeled as a science fiction, a lot of story is pretty vague and you don't get much of the world building, like where those AFs come from, which I think it makes sense because it's not a hard-hitting science fiction novel. It's just more about the themes and the concepts. the author is trying to portray. I really like the book because of the narrative, you know, because Klara is a robot and the story is told from her perspective, so her narrative comes across as a bit robotic and detached at the beginning. But as Klara takes in more information, as her insight grows, the narrative gradually brightens up and you can actually feel it, especially when she observes that there's kindness and love among humans. It's so heartwarming to read, and the first half of the book is just so wholesome, and I don't really mind the book is a slow burn because the narrative has already like grabbed my attention. And also because of the health issue Josie has, Klara gets to meet her father, and well, Josie's parents don't live with each other, and from Josie's father, Klara also gets to learn about humanity and love. So that's another part of the book that I quite liked. And also Klara, she is really pure and optimistic, and her sincerity towards Josie just has really melted my heart. There's a couple of times where Klara is like pleading to the sun, like she was on her knees, asking the sun to give his special nourishment to Josie because Josie, she's just really sick and bedridden, and Klara believes that it's her responsibility to restore Josie's health. Klara said, and she says, "Supposing I could do something special to please you, something to make you particularly happy, if I could achieve such a thing, then would you consider, in return, showing special kindness to Josie, just as you did that time for Beggarman and his dog?" And when I was reading this part of the book, I just teared up because it was so moving because of how, you know, how genuine and sincere those pleadings are. And also Klara, she has this childlike innocence. I just find it so heartwarming. It's just such a heartfelt book. So that's Klara and the Sun. And then I read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And this is one of those books that 5 stars aren't enough, because it's so beautifully written. Like, I love this book so much, and if you haven't already, you have to read this book. And actually, before I talk about what this book is about, I just want to say, you know, so for most of the book, you know, for most of the, you know, The Picture of Dorian Gray in circulation, those are censored because the original publisher deemed the book too vulgar and just deleted I think 500 words of the book. So if you want to read the original one, you need to buy the uncensored Picture of Dorian Gray. So I actually found this book the other day at a bookstore, so I was quite thrilled to see it and I purchased it. But I'm yet to read it. I'm thinking of reading it maybe sometime next year because I just read this book last month. So The Picture of Dorian Gray, in a nutshell, is about the decadent fall of a young man into sin and corruption. It all begins with a painter called Basil Hallward, and he becomes really infatuated with Dorian Gray, who is the quintessence of youthful beauty, and he decides to paint a portrait for Dorian Gray. But through Basil, Dorian gets to know a friend of his called Lord Henry, and Lord Henry is a hedonist and a dandy, and Dorian is soon enthralled by Lord Henry's philosophy of life, which is that sensual pleasure and beauty are the only 2 things that are worth pursuing in one's life. And the speech of Lord Henry makes Dorian realize his own beauty is transient, it's fleeting. So as soon as Basil completes the portrait of Dorian, he gets really upset and he is really jealous of his own painting because his painting can have that youthful look of his forever, whereas he must age. And Dorian was like, if only it were the other way around, if the picture could age instead of me and I would want to have the youthful look forever, then I could give anything for that. I could give my soul for that. And that's what ends up happening. Throughout 18 years, all his cruelty, all his sins, all his age are reflected on that painting, never on his own face. So Dorian Gray just becomes this really evil guy that can get away with anything. He keeps corrupting his innocent friends, and at the same time he keeps piling up, you know, artwork, things like, you know, embroidered work and perfume in his house to kind of fill the void of his life and his vanity. And at the same time his painting just gets all the more hideous, whereas his face just remains that of a young boy. But, you know, things can't stay like this forever, and there's something that happens in the later part of the book that triggers everything to fall apart, and it just gets really dark and bizarre. There's blackmail, revenge, murder, opium, but the book managed to hold me spellbound, and I was like reading this book 3 a.m. in the morning. It's so good. This book just shows how a seemingly pure soul can be corrupted if it's left in a sense of privation and terrible guidance. But I mean, Lord Henry, he is not the only one to blame. I was shaking my head every time at the poor decision Dorian Gray made. I was like, just have some limits, calm down for God's sake. You can't just, follow your desire all the time. I mean, there's something that we all can learn from Dorian Gray's tragic ending. I'm not gonna say it, but you just have to read the book. And also, the homosexual suggestion in this book is quite groundbreaking. Like, I did relish in reading that. So yeah, that's the Picture of Dorian Gray, and I gave it 5 out of 5. And then I read Hamnet by Maggie, which I rated 4 stars. It is a historical fiction, and Hamnet is the name of Shakespeare's song. And this book on the surface is about the devastating story behind the inspiration of Shakespeare's famous play Hamlet. It actually has more to do with Shakespeare's wife, Agnes. And I like this book even before I read it because the main characters are those who were obscured by time and history. To be honest, there's not much to tell you about this book, but basically on a summer day in 1956, Hamlet died. And that's really what this story is about. But what is amazing is how the story is told. So we are introduced to Shakespeare's song Hamlet in the first chapter, but since then we haven't really been with his song. So we got a lot of his perspective at first, and then in the next chapter the narrative flashes forward to the time when Shakespeare and Agnes first met. So it's their love story, and then another chapter about Hamlet, and then another chapter about Agnes. So the narrative zooms in on one character and then zooms back out to get a fuller picture, and then zooms back in, zooms back out until the past meets the present. And I found it really ingenious. We get to see Agnes' role as a mother in the family, and we also get to see, the love story of Shakespeare and Agnes, the trials and tribulations they've been through and everything. And Agnes in this book is a very folkloric and fairy tale-esque character. Like, she can tell the future and she can see the past. So to her, the world is transparent. And she also knows everything about herbs and medicine. So if someone in the town is sick, then they will just, come to Agnes, and Agnes will fix them something, like some medicine, and then they will take it home, and then they will drink it, and they will get well very soon. So as it happens, when Agnes is pregnant the second time, she isn't able to tell the sex of her baby, which she was able to the first time. And she can also see that when she dies, she is with 2 children. So naturally, the baby in her belly is her second child. But when the day comes when Agnes gives birth to her second child, it turns out to be twins, a boy and a girl. So it's just really terrifying because one of them is going to die before Agnes, and she can't tell which one it is. So, she just starts to fear her foresight. And in the book, it says that she will defend her 3 babies against all that lies beyond this world. She will not rest, not sleep, until she knows they are safe. She will push back, fight against, undo the foresight she has always had about having 2 children. She will. She knows she can. But still, it's going to happen. Like, Hamlet is going to die. And because the author, Maggie had 17 near-death experiences, which was detailed in her book called I Am, which I haven't read yet. So she understands, foreboding, fear of death, and heartache, and she is able to write them with such clarity. Like, I'll just read you something from the book. All in vain. What is given may be taken away at any time. Cruelty and devastation wait for you around corners, inside coffers, behind doors. They can leap out at you at any moment, like a thief or brigand. The trick is never to let down your guard. Never think you are safe. Never take for granted that your children's hearts beat, that they suck milk, that they draw breath, that they walk and speak and smile and argue and play. Never for a moment forget they may be gone, snatched from you, in the blink of an eye, borne away from you like thistledown. Oh my god. So that is Hamnet by Maggie, and I'm hoping to read more of her books soon. And then I read Persuasion by Jane Austen. And let me tell you, this book makes my heart sing. Oh my god. It's definitely a 5-star for me, and my favorite Austen book so far. I have read Pride and Prejudice and Emma, but this is my favorite. And I thought I would start by reading you my favorite part of the book, which is the letter from Captain Wentworth to Anne Elliot, which is our protagonist. And I'll just read you a part of it actually. I can no longer listen in silence. I must speak to you by such means as are within my reach. You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope. Tell me not that I am too late, that such precious feelings are gone forever. I offer myself to you again with a heart even more your own than when you almost break it. 8.5 years ago. Dare not say that man forgets sooner than woman. His love has an earlier death. I have loved none but you. Unjust I may have been, weak and resentful I have been, but never inconstant. You alone have brought me to Bath, for you alone I think and plan. Oh my god. So, Persuasion is basically a second chance romance, and the story takes place 8 years after Anne Elliot broke off her engagement with Frederick Wentworth. But circumstances have led to Anne's reacquainting with Captain Wentworth. So just very soon after the engagement was broken off, Wentworth was promoted to captain, and his fortunes have prospered ever since. And he is of course in want of a wife, because we all know that a single man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a wife. So Anne still has some feelings for Captain Wentworth, but she can only look on with regret as her former lover seems to have another in his marital sights. But of course, from the letter I just read you, you know that Captain Wentworth also has some feelings for Anne. So you know, the charm of the situation featured in Persuasion is that two people longing for each other but suffer in silence, and almost nobody from the other families knows about it. So it's all about longing and repressed desires. Like, it's just a game of trying to guess the feelings of the other person, and as a reader you feel so special to be allowed into that little world. And also another reason why I like this book so much is because I think we all know about Jane Austen through her more famous works such as Pride and Prejudice and Emma, and the female protagonists in those books are quite young, like 21, 23. But in Persuasion, Anne Elliot, she is actually 27, just, you know, because she's at that age, so she's more mature and more self-possessed, and I think even kinder than the other protagonists. So yeah, I would highly recommend this book, and I think the Netflix adaptation just did not do justice to this book at all. You have to read this book. It's so good. So the last book of this wrap up is a book that I didn't like, and it's Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. And I was so disappointed in this book because so many people on BookTube seem to like this book, and I found it insufferable. It's the first time ever that I was annoyed by a book. Like, are you joking? Like, I don't hate this book, I just don't like it, and I gave it 2 stars. So basically, the story takes place in a cafe in Tokyo where people can travel back in time to meet the people they want to meet and say something they wish they had said to them. So, you know, there's actually a bunch of rules regarding time traveling, and it's very restrictive. And also, the present won't change no matter what you've said. But as a time traveler, you would hope that because of saying that specific thing, you'd have less regrets. This book consists of 4 short stories where we follow 4 characters who want to travel back or forward in time. Yes, you can travel forward in time. And that's basically what this book is about. So what I don't like about this book is that the writing is pretty repetitive. Like, there's a bunch of rules regarding time traveling, which I understand you have to explain it very carefully. But, you know, once those rules are explained, they get explained again later in the book. And this book is really small, like just 200 pages. You don't need to explain things again. I don't get it. Another thing I don't like about this book is the gender stereotype. Especially the female characters, they're just so stereotypical. Like, for example, in the first story, there's a woman, 27 or 28. She's fluent in 6 languages. She topped her year in her university. She has a very well-paid job, but somehow she is not able to articulate her feelings to her boyfriend. Like, I was just baffled. And also this woman, so she is a conventionally attractive Japanese woman, and this is how the author describes her. Despite her conservative clothes, the exceptional figure was easy to discern. Like a model from a fashion magazine, she was a beautiful woman who would draw anyone's gaze. Yes, she was a woman who combined intelligence and beauty, but whether she realized this was a different matter. And then the paragraph followed. My work is my lover, she would say. She had turned down approaches from many men as though flicking away specks of dust. Like, I was just laughing. I don't like this writing at all. And there's another part regarding gender stereotypes. So this is from a husband whose wife is pregnant. And it says that he considered the gynecology clinic to be a sanctuary for women only. where no man should venture, in italics. I just don't like this kind of writing and this kind of, you know, gender stereotypes in books in general. So those kind of just made this book a 3-star, but then I gave it 2 stars because everything in this book, every short story, is just so obvious, so predictable, and so boring. Like, I was just so disappointed because BookTube loves this book, but I don't. So these are books that I've read this month. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And also comment down below the books that you read recently and you liked. Ciao!